Hi and happy Sabbath. It's good to be together again. Let's start with a word of prayer. Dear God, we thank you for another Sabbath day, the last one of this year actually, and we want to thank you that we can be together with a bigger group this time and study together, repeat what we have learned during the Midnight Cry from the Midnight Cry message. Thank you that you guide us when we study your word now, when we repeat the truths that have been revealed to us, and that they may be a light for us still, because we know the Midnight Cry shines from behind, and it enlightens our path all the way to the end of the close of probation. And we ask that this light might shine brighter now in the light of current events. Help us to build bridges, make connections to what is going on around us at the moment. We ask this and thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. So the last time with Lisanne, we looked at the information war line. I'm going to share my screen with you so we can just shortly repeat some of the most important points. Share. So that's that. Hope it's visible for everyone. So in 1989, time of the end, we have the beginning of the information age. We live in the information age, and we know that in this time, we knew from the Stone Age, their weapons of that age were weapons of stone. We have the Iron Age, there you had weapons of iron. And in the information age, we fight with information as a weapon. So 1989, you have what is also referred to the Internet's Big Bang, the birth of the World Wide Web, which you can see developed from 1989, 1990 until 1991. You have the World Wide Web suggested, developed, and released. And it was Tim Berners-Lee who did that with his proposal, information management proposal. He suggested it in 1989. He developed the first web browser in 1990, and 1991 it was released. You had, we come to 1996, which is, you cannot really see that on this line, but we know that 1996 is a formalization. And there we know we had two streams of information formalized. We know of the birth of Fox News. We also know that established news outlets like the Washington Post, they went online. You also have Yahoo News. And something else I wrote down here is 𝘃𝗏𝗃𝗏𝗏. 𝘃𝗏𝗃𝗏 was like the predecessor or the first version of WikiLeaks. It was the predecessor of WikiLeaks, which we are going to refer to later on. And what is also interesting is that it was a formalization for three parties. 1996 was a formalization for Russia. That's because Russia, they launched their first attack on US US government. Like they wanted to extract information from them. And we know of Moonlight Maze, that was their hack attack that they launched on the US. So they were like formalizing their mission of waging information war against the King of the North. The King of the South declared this war against the King of the North. You had Islam formalizing their message. That's because in 1996, Islam, or radical Islam, they declared war on the US. And you have the religious right. Now we wouldn't only call it the religious right. We know it's broader than just religious factions. The right wing also had their information stream formalized in the form of Fox News, because Fox News is this information outlet that attracts the interests of people who are interested in hearing conspiracy theories. Yeah, they're attracted by that, and this information channel supports that kind of world view. That's that. Then that brings us to the Patriot Act in 2001. With the Patriot Act, it brings government control over the World Wide Web that has been launched. Now, the surveillance that the government wants to conduct, that was prior to that, it was focused on, that the Patriot Act focuses on telephone surveillance, sorry. And later, it also enables surveillance of the World Wide Web. 2004, we had the restraint of the executive branch, which was then George Bush. George Bush tried to extend the Patriot Act to give the government more power and more freedoms to collect data. And it was James Comey and Robert Mueller who worked against that attempt. They worked to restrain George Bush in that attempt. And we will see later in 2017, we see these same names, James Comey and Robert Mueller. We see them come up again because they are doing their work again to restrain the executive power, but now under Donald Trump, which we will see was less successful or unsuccessful. The Patriot Act is directly connected to what happened in 2013, when you had Edward Snowden leaking important information on Operation PRISM. I actually haven't noted it on the line, but that was 2007. You had Operation PRISM, which was a secret operation that worked to further, it was actually in collaboration with big companies like Google, Facebook, where the government collected massive amounts of data. And that was later revealed by Edward Snowden, that actually the government collected this data to a far greater extent than the American public was ever aware of. So that was leaked by Edward Snowden through WikiLeaks. It was interesting that Julian Assange, who was the owner of the WikiLeaks platform, he advised Edward Snowden that after this leak, he would flee to Russia, that he would be safe there from being prosecuted. Because why is that? Why is he safe in Russia? Because WikiLeaks is also used by Russia as a channel to publish disinformation. WikiLeaks has a lot of good things, but like with other channels such as Russia Today and like Russia Today, there is 10% intentional disinformation. An example, so the CIA of the International Intelligence Agency of the US treats WikiLeaks as a channel for Russian disinformation. So they keep an eye on WikiLeaks because an example for such disinformation was in 2014. You had Russian soldiers invade Ukraine, but WikiLeaks claimed that there are no Russian soldiers on Ukraine territory. So with that, they supported what Putin wanted to sell to the world, that, he just put out a blatant lie and said, I'm not in Ukraine. And when Obama called him and said, we can see you, that you are in Ukraine, we know that your soldiers are there, Putin would just insist and say, no, we're not in there, and change the topic. So, and WikiLeaks was a platform who supported that narrative, that Russian disinformation. And they even turn the whole thing around. So they turn around the whole narrative and they say the truth that Russia is in Ukraine is actually just a Western conspiracy. That's how they wage information war. Russia wages information war, and they have their platforms that they can use to launch their assaults and trifle their lies everywhere. So I want to bring our attention back to a quote that we all know. It's MR 63.2. I can just copy paste it in the chat. Let's refresh our minds on that. The influence of mind on mind, so strong a power for good when sanctified, is equally strong for evil in the hands of those who oppose God. This power Satan used in his work of instilling evil into the minds of the angels, and he made it appear that he was seeking the good of the universe. As the anointed cherub, Lucifer had been highly exalted. He was greatly loved by the heavenly beings, and his influence over them was strong. Many of them listened to his suggestions and believed his words. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels and prevailed not. Neither was their place found anymore in heaven. So this is the quote we use to show that the very first war that was fought in heaven was actually an information war. When we read the first sentence, we can see it talks about an influence that is exercised from one mind upon the other. The first sentence is like the topic sentence of this whole paragraph. That means the first sentence introduces us to what the body of the paragraph is talking about. And then usually the last sentence of a paragraph is just a repeat and enlarge of that first sentence. So you have, it shows you influence of mind on mind. It's about exercising influence for good or for bad or for evil. And the last sentence defines that we are talking about the first war in heaven. So, and in the body, you can see again, it's about instilling evil into some other minds by exercising influence. I'll just grab my... So we see this information war. It's about sowing doubt. What Lucifer did, he sowed doubt and he instilled evil into the minds of the other angels. And that caused that they were actually turning against one another, and that they couldn't come to sensible conclusions anymore. That war in heaven developed into a proxy war that was then carried out on the earth and developed further. And that's where we are now. At the end of the world, we see the same principles of this war being applied in that information war that we are in the middle of at the moment. We know, we also reviewed last time with Lisanne, that during the Cold War, information warfare was also the focus of the Cold War was information war. We also have this famous quote of Yuri Bezmenov, this former Russian spy that worked for the KGB. I think it was during the Cold War when he said that famous quote where he says only 15%, let me write this down. He says 15% of time, money, and manpower is used for espionage. And the other 85% are actually invested into something that he refers to as ideological subversion. And he defines for us what that is. He says ideological subversion is a slow process to change the perception of reality. So that is to change the perception of reality to such an extent that despite the abundance of information, nobody can come to sensible conclusions in the interest of defending themselves, their families, their community, or their country. So it's the slow process. It's the change. They change the perception of reality. And so that no one can come to sensible conclusions. No sensible conclusions. Despite the abundance of information. So that's what we saw 2014, right? When Russia invaded Ukraine, everybody could see they had their soldiers in there. There was information available abundantly, but there was also a lot of disinformation and just putting out a lie out there and saying, I'm not in there. And people cannot come to sensible conclusions anymore. Because, yeah, you had the vast majority of the Russian population believing the lie. Okay, so that's how the KGB operated. 85% ideological subversion, information warfare, and only 15% was espionage. And Putin does that very same work today. The work that is done in the Cold War, he has done it for years. He has been polluting information streams, especially social media nowadays. He's polluting it with information that is attractive to people who listen to conspiracy theories. And it works, as we said, 2014 and Ukraine. No one could come to sensible conclusions. And it's also, when we compare the US to Russia, you have the USA has a 20 trillion economy, $1 trillion economy, whereas Russia is comparatively small. Their economy amounts to 1.2 trillion. So that's smaller than Italy. If they would launch a hot war against the US, they couldn't sort of survive long. It wouldn't be a long-term war. If Putin wants to win, he needs to do that from within. So it makes sense that he applies information warfare strategies to bring down, to turn the US against itself from within. What also happened in 2013 was you had Putin found the IRA, an agency with about 1,000 employees who are just there to invest their time creating Twitter accounts, comment on articles, and sow disinformation. That served him as a preparation for the invasion 2014 to Ukraine. So you have the IRA here as well. Let's see, what was it? Internet Research Agency. IRA. And you see what took years in the Cold War, sowing disinformation, sowing distrust among the population. It took years in the Cold War, but it just sometimes only takes a few seconds. In 2016, for example, when they meddled in the in the US election, because with social media, the disinformation is put out there in seconds. Okay, then so that's so much to that line that I just highlighted some of the waymarks we talked about, and here and there I added some information. We had one open question on 2016. We had actually one question about 2019. We wanted to know what exactly was the information warfare in the Battle of Raphia or the Battle of Asculum. But I haven't found an answer to that yet. I think I would need more time. So I have just focused on the other question that we have asked, which was here. You have James Comey and Robert Mueller in 2004, and you have them again in 2017 when they tried. So in 2004, they restrained the executive branch because they prevent Bush from extending the Patriot Act. And let's write that down. And we wanted to know, who are these people, James Comey and Robert Mueller, and what was their work in 2017? What exactly was it, the role they played in the restraint. So James Comey and Robert Mueller, they are two highly respected figures within the FBI. And I've just made a little drawing here to clarify a bit what the FBI is organizationally. You have the US government, and there you have the three branches, the executive, that would be the president, that is the Congress, and you have the judicial. The judicial branch has about 15 departments, I think, and one of them, these departments, is the Department of Justice, and the FBI is one agency in the Department of Justice. That's the Federal Bureau of Investigation, so the intelligence agency of the US. That is the domestic intelligence agency. You also have an international one, and that's the CIA. But James Comey and Robert Mueller, they both worked for the FBI, and they had a very strong reputation. They were highly respected and had a strong reputation for following the rule of law. They also already demonstrated that in 2004, where you had this whole story with, you had John Ashcroft. He was the Attorney General. And George Bush needed his signature. George Bush needed his signature to extend the powers of the Patriot Act. And he wanted to add some things that would give the government more power to conduct surveillance. So he needed his signature. But John Ashcroft was in hospital, and you had James Comey, who was at that time acting Attorney General. So he was filling in for John Ashcroft, acting Attorney General. So Bush, he probably knew that James Comey wouldn't agree with him. So what he did, he went to the hospital and harassed John Ashcroft to sign that Patriot Act to, these extensions. But the wife of John Ashcroft was not happy about that because, of course, John Ashcroft didn't want to be bothered at the hospital, and she didn't want him to be bothered when he was sick. So she contacted James Comey. James Comey rushed to the hospital, and they really had this discussion in the hospital room. They had a debate. James Comey trying to convince John Ashcroft not to sign these documents that Bush wanted to have signed, and he managed to convince John Ashcroft. He didn't do anything. Bush was not pleased. He first said, I will just carry on anyway. I will go through with this anyway without your approval. And because of that, you had James Comey and Robert Mueller, who was at that time the FBI director. Robert Mueller, FBI director. They handed in their resignation. They said, if you go ahead with this, we will resign. So that was enormous pressure for George Bush. That put him under pressure to not further pursue his intentions. So he backed down and said basically, okay, I'm not going to go through with this extended Patriot Act. That's how in 2004, these two people, James Comey and Robert Mueller, they managed to restrain the executive branch. And then that history repeats in 2017. Under Trump now, you have James Comey is now the director of the FBI. And Robert Mueller he is appointed special counsel in the investigation of Russian collusion. Special counsel. So in 2017, James Comey was investigating, he was leading the investigations into Clinton's emails. So you had this email scandal that during the 2016 election campaign. I will just read a short portion from Wikipedia. He was responsible for overseeing the FBI's investigation of the Hillary Clinton email controversy. His role in the 2016 US presidential election was highly controversial. Some analysts and some Clinton supporters claim his decision shortly before the 2016 election might have cost her the presidency, particularly his decision to reopen the investigation into her emails less than 2 weeks before the election. So you had, the problem was that Hillary Clinton, I think she had like, she had a private email account and she used it for government affairs, and that was posing a risk for national security. James Comey was investigating this case. And only 2 weeks before the election, he decided that this case would be reopened, which was, of course, very damaging for Hillary Clinton. So it's a highly controversial investigation. Anyway, he was investigating into this. But as soon as Trump came into office, the FBI director, James Comey, told Congress, the FBI has, as part of our counterintelligence mission, opened an investigation into the Russian government's efforts to interfere in the 2016 presidential elections. So he was not only investigating against, or in the case Hillary Clinton, he also opened this famous investigation to investigate collusion between the Russian government and the Trump campaign. Russian collusion, which Trump always called a witch hunt. That includes investigating the nature of any links between individuals associated with the Trump campaign and the Russian government. So they looked at the connections between Russian government and the Trump campaign. and whether there was any coordination between the campaign and Russia's efforts. One such link was Michael Flynn. It might be a name that you remember. Sorry, I'm still practicing with this pen. Michael Flynn. Basically, Comey found out that Michael Flynn had previously met with a Russian figure, and that figure was called Sergei Kislyak, and so the two met and they talked about Obama's sanctions on Russia. But Flynn denied on record that he ever met with that person. So he lied to the FBI, which is a federal crime, and he was recorded doing that. Comey had proof that Michael Flynn was compromised, that that they couldn't trust him, and Trump came under pressure to fire him. Many suspicious links between Trump associates and Russian officials and spies were discovered, and the relationships between Russians and Team Trump, including Paul Manafort, Flynn, and Stone, were widely reported by the press. Members of Trump's campaign and his White House staff, particularly Flynn, were in contact with Russian officials, both before and after the election. On December 29, 2016, Flynn talked with Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak about sanctions that were imposed that same day. Flynn later resigned. So Trump came under pressure by these investigations, and he repeatedly tried to get James Comey, the FBI director, on his side. That's something that is unprecedented, because the FBI is just a neutral, independent government agency that is not, how do you say, it's bipartisan. It's not taking sides for anyone. It's independent. And so now you have the executive branch, you have Donald Trump trying to get James Comey on his side to reassure himself of his loyalty. But he's unsuccessful. Comey continues the investigation into US ties, and he tries to make clear to Trump, I'm not your friend, I'm not your loyal. It's not my job to be loyal to you, because I'm doing my job, which is I work for an independent organization. So he continues the investigation into the US ties to Russia, and he confirms that publicly. It's made public, the press writes over it. And that becomes increasingly clear to Trump. So he sees, okay, this Comey, I cannot use him as a puppet. And he goes too far. Trump decides to fire Comey. That's when he decides to take this step. But he has a meeting with his counselors, and back then Steve Bannon was one of these important advisors to Trump. Bannon said, no, you cannot just fire this person, because it will look very damaging to you. You need a story to back this up. You need a reason to cover up your real intentions. You need something else to justify that decision that you fire James Comey. And so that is when another name comes into play, which is Rod Rosenstein. He was then the attorney, or the deputy attorney general. Deputy Attorney General. That is, I think, what James Comey was in 2004. Oh, he was acting Attorney General. The Deputy Attorney General is the second highest position in the Department of Justice. And he is replacing the Attorney General if, the Attorney General is absent. So Rod Rosenstein was urged by Trump and his advisors to write a memo to basically put James Comey into a bad light. So they urge him to write this memo where Rod Rosenstein, he points out mistakes Comey made to serve, or that Comey made in the investigation into Hillary Clinton's email. That's very interesting. We'll see why. And this memo he wrote should serve as a basis to fire Comey. It should serve Trump to give him a justification to fire Comey. In the memo, it said that Comey was wrong in making public information that actually damaged Hillary Clinton. So Comey published information that was actually secret intelligence that damaged Hillary Clinton. But that, of course, is a ridiculous contradiction with his own campaign. You have Trump campaigning with his lock her up. You heard crowds chanting, lock her up. He was campaigning on lock her up, lock Hillary Clinton up. And then now he criticizes Comey for investigating against her when he was actually super thankful for these emails, and he praised, back then he praised the FBI that these emails were discovered and that is a scandal, and he used it to criticize Hillary Clinton, that she was very careless and she was a danger for the national security of the country. So something that he really used for his campaign, he now takes to criticize her, which is, of course, very hypocrite and contradictory. And of course, the press realized that, because that was then what the Trump team, his campaign team, his advisors, that they told the press, yeah, that's the reason. The memo, they pointed the press to the memo of Rod Rosenstein and said, Rod Rosenstein advised this, so that's why Trump fired his Attorney General, James Comey. Because he made a mistake in investigating against Clinton and publishing this information. And so it goes, Trump fired Comey, and Rod Rosenstein, who wrote this memo, he gets all the blame because he wrote this memo, and now, the Trump campaign, Team Trump points to him and says, yeah, he wrote this memo, and Rosenstein is not pleased at all with this development. So he appoints a special counsel appoints special counsel, which is Robert Mueller. He's the special counsel for the investigation into Russian collusion and obstruction of justice on the part of Trump. So investigation because James Comey was fired. Now they needed someone to carry on this investigation. on Russian collusion. But now, added to that, they also now investigate on obstruction of justice, because Trump made efforts to stop this investigation. Obstruction of justice, that's what you call it. He tried to prevent justice from taking its course, from doing its work that it's supposed to do. Okay, and Robert Mueller, he carries out his work. He carries on the investigation into Russian collusion, and we know he brings out this long report. But as far as I remembered, it didn't, as Robert Mueller said in his own words, it doesn't convict him, but it also doesn't exonerate him. And the problem is, which he states at the very beginning, a president cannot be held accountable for what he did in office, basically. It doesn't count as a crime. He cannot be convicted during his presidency, but he could be later when he's a normal civilian again. That's what he said. How do you say that? That was his hidden message, basically. But he couldn't make an accusation at that time against the president because that wouldn't be legal. So that's why it was all very flowery language. And yeah, the president is not convicted, but he's also not exonerated. That's what we remember from this report. Yeah, and actually that's already what I had researched on this topic. And I just now want to give you the opportunity to ask any questions if something was unclear, if I can repeat anything, if that's necessary. Let me know your thoughts or questions you might have.
Question about the last part. You said that Trump, as a president while in office, he was not, how you say, he couldn't be like convicted. But I thought that was only later when the Supreme Court decided that the president in office cannot be convicted. But this was before this Supreme Court decision.
Which Supreme Court decision are you talking about now?
Yeah, that was just like a few years ago. The presidential immunity.
Oh, you don't mean in July now? July 24, where you had this.
Oh yeah, of course, that was case. This July.
Yeah, that's a good question, and the point is, the July 1st case, it didn't really add much to the current situation. It was already that was already in place, and the July 1, it was not actually a decision. It was just a statement the court made. They said, basically what they said is, they just spoke out what is already law. They didn't really make a decision. They just handed it back to the courts and said, okay, this is the current situation, so you need to take this back and deal with it on your own.
Okay.
It didn't actually add anything new.
A very important big
You could say it reconfirmed what was already established. Yeah, okay. But that's a good point. That's I think wasn't clear to many of us. Thank you for your question. Yeah. Any other questions?
Could you repeat the conclusion of the 2017 Robert Mueller and James Comey thing. I don't know what to call it, but like
The conclusion of the report, of the
yeah,
investigation.
yeah, like once again. So they,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe what was James Comey's role in that? That is maybe
James
unclear.
Comey, yeah, James Comey started the investigation in 2017.
Sure.
He was the leading, he was the FBI director and leading this investigation. But you know, Trump fought very strongly against it because he saw it as a threat. That's why he decided to fire James Comey, but he tried to cover it up with another reason. He said, no, yeah, with this memo of Rod Rosenstein that I mentioned. So once he was fired, then someone else needed to carry on the investigation, and that was Robert Mueller.
Okay.
And the report concluded, I think I have that here.
Neither guilty nor innocent.
Yeah, neither convicted, or it doesn't accuse him, but it doesn't exonerate him either.
Got it.
I think his opening remark was that, where did I? The report states that Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election was illegal and occurred in sweeping and systematic fashion. It was welcomed by the Trump campaign as it expected benefit from such efforts. The investigation does not conclude that the president committed a crime. However, it also does not exonerate him.
Yeah. Okay.
And then the obstruction of justice part, it says Trump may have obstructed justice while president and one before he was elected, noting that he privately tried to control the investigation. He had private meetings with Comey where he invited him for dinner, and then just the two of them in one room, which is actually not allowed. Everyone, there's always someone needs to be in the room. And there was one scene in this documentary, if you want to watch it again, it's very good, PBS documentary, where James Comey, when he had these private meetings with Trump that were actually illegal, he always made private notes. He had to document everything so that he could use it later, that he would have on paper what happened, that he wouldn't be accused of any illegal activities. So he documented and said, he looked at Rod Rosenstein with a look that actually says, don't go, you cannot leave me alone here with Trump. I cannot be in a room alone with him. You should. And then later also, Rod Rosenstein left. And then, yeah, that he also had meetings with Rod Rosenstein telling him you shouldn't have left. Because now we had this very awkward situation where Trump actually asked me to be loyal to him. He asked me for my loyalty, which is illegal, and it also brings me into a very difficult situation.
Thank you.
So these were these attempts by Trump to control the investigation that are referenced here in the report. That was the obstruction of justice that Trump attempted. And
this all happened in 2017?
Yeah, 2017 to 2019, Robert Mueller was the special counsel who led this investigation. I'll share my screen again. Here. So that was James Comey was 2017 and Robert Mueller was 2017 to 2019. And then he laid down his office that he took for 2 years. I think he was already retired, and he especially came back to fill in this role to lead this investigation further, 2017 to 19, and then he retired again. So that attempt to restrain the executive branch in 2017 actually did not succeed. James Comey was fired, and we know that the report, in the end, it wasn't used against Trump. It didn't do what Robert Mueller hoped it would do, probably, because now we have Trump coming back with even more power. Any other questions?
And Robert Mueller did not succeed because he retired?
No, I think that was all according to plan. And he did his best. He did a good work. He did everything in this report, but that was all he could do. It wasn't later used against Trump. So the system failed there, I would say. The executive branch was not restrained. That was the result we see. In 2004, Bush was restrained, the executive branch was restrained, but in 2017, that didn't work. Does it make sense? Even though that's the perfect example for the information warfare, because look at the report. It was good, it was detailed, it had everything there that was needed to later indict Trump. There was an abundance of information, of facts, of evidence, but the American system, the American population couldn't come to sensible conclusions. That's exactly what Russia is doing with their information war. Despite the abundance of information that is available, the public cannot come to sensible conclusions. And that's exactly what Putin has been preparing for all this time. What he's done with sowing disinformation, that moment when he succeeded in the elections, and when it wasn't uncovered. It was uncovered, but people, even though they have this information, it's just like, yeah, okay, and now, and they just carry on. It doesn't have any serious consequences for the culprits, say it that way. Oh, does that make sense? I think that would be the conclusion of my presentation, and yeah, the parallels shown between 2004 and 2017, and yeah, the conclusion being the information warfare techniques that the King of the South uses have been successful there. Let's close with a word of prayer. Dear God, we thank you for this information that we got Thank you for the light. It shines on our current times. Help us to understand what is going on right now when we see this warfare raging around us, and we try to identify where we are on the reform line. Help us to go back to our database where we have stored information of the midnight cry, where we can dig for the hidden truth that you revealed us, and that it may be, that it may serve as this light that shines on the path until the very end. We know that in the time period of the latter rain, we are not little plants anymore, but we are supposed to ripen our fruit. And we pray that this might happen, that our fruit gets ripe in this time, that we apply all the knowledge that we have acquired in the previous dispensations, that we may now be able to apply it to understand where we are in the Earth's history. Thank you for the blessing of being together, and be with everyone who is celebrating Sabbath today. And we thank you for all in Jesus' name. Amen.